Yeah, the screen. Okay. Great start.
We're up.
We're up. Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Canellis. I'm a vice president at Eastwick, which is a integrated marketing firm. I've been there about 3 years. And before that, I was a reporter for about 20 years. And our panel today is called How to Pitch the Press. Now, I realize it's about 2:45 in the afternoon. It's sunny outside, so please, feel free to fall asleep. In fact, that's probably the best advice I can get you if you're ever going to pitch the press, because you're going to go out there with your startup, and you're going to meet a lot of people who are only halfway paying attention, or nodding off, or forgetting your names and things like that. Just get used to it, right? So that's one of the key rules we were dealing with reporters. We're going to go to the panelists here, and also we're going to be, obviously encouraging people to ask questions. In fact, if you don't ask questions, we'll start calling on you. But first, I want to introduce Cindy Sandor. She's the founder and CEO of Firestart Partners. And Cindy, why don't you just describe what you do? And
Sure.
We'll go from there.
So my company works with startups specifically to help them in the early stages of building that roadmap to get them to the launch phase. And what that means is actually building the positioning and sort of crafting the whole story around.
Is there a microphone?
Okay.
Just move it up.
Hang on.
Okay, you can do it.
Can you hear me now? A little better?
Is yours?
I don't know.
I can't see how to do it.
You're on. You should be.
I'm on? Okay. Can you hear me now? No.
Just move it higher.
Can you hear me now?
There we go. All right.
Okay. Okay, I'll start over very quickly. Firestart Partners is a consulting company. We work with lots of early stage young companies who are still trying to work out their positioning, their shaping who they are, maybe getting ready for investor money, and need help on the marketing business development side. We come in, we help them with that roadmap and get them from A to Z, and we do it very quickly. And so that's what we do.
Excellent. And next time we have Owen Linderholm, senior, let me get the exact title right, senior editor, Yahoo Small Business Advisor. Why don't you describe what you do and what Small Business Advisor does?
Sure. So I'm the editor of Yahoo Small Business Advisor, which is the content part of Yahoo Small Business. So essentially, we do all the small business and most of the startup, actually, coverage that Yahoo does. So technically speaking, you're all able to pitch directly to me. And I should at least pay some attention instead of just falling asleep. I've been an editor for about 30 years, initially in technology, then switching over to business sides. I've also worked in 3 different startups for a total of about 8 years. So I have some idea of what you're all thinking about and going through. And that's about it.
Excellent, great. Let me actually go back to you, because you're actually the person who receives pitches, and a lot of people who are startups and things like that. You probably get about, 800, 900 pitches a day, something like that, or that many emails?
Not quite that many, but yeah, lots. There's a stream of stuff coming into my email inbox, and I actually do look at it all. So don't think that that things are ignored. It's just that I don't have time to respond to it all. So if I'm not interested, I ignore it.
What grabs you? Because I remember when I was a reporter, I would actually have delete key was my favorite key, because it was almost a safety valve. You had to do something. Was it the first sentence? Does that be in the title?
No, it's the first sentence. It's the approach. It's the idea. So a lot of our audience is two groups. One group is people who are currently running and operating small businesses of all kinds. They typically come to our site for an answer to a problem. They read it and they leave again. That's it. They're done. They're not going to stick around for anything else, because small business owners and people running businesses don't have a lot of time. Slightly more than half, so that first group's about 40%. Second group, about 60%, are people who are aspirational small business owners. And that means everybody from the guy stuck in a humdrum gray job, idly thinking, I should work for myself instead of this jerk I hate, to a woman who's actively thinking, I'm doing it, I'm starting, I've spent some money, I've got a name for the business, I know what we're going to do, and is just looking for help in all stages of starting a business. And they're probably our primary audience. And frankly, the only thing I'm interested in the pitch is this going to help one of those two groups of people solve a problem they have or are going to have. If it's not, I'm not interested. I'm just gone again. You've lost me instantly. So, just because a small business has just started and it is opening for business, I have zero interest in that. If you've got an answer to how, I'll give you an example of a story that did very well for us last year. Is a young girl, 17 years old, designed a kind of flip-flops called fish flops. They're very nicely styled. Some of them have glowing lights. And the key thing is she got them into Nordstrom's, to be sold by Nordstrom's. She made over $1 million in the first year and is doing really, really well. The key there is that story about getting into Nordstrom's. That's interesting to a lot of people. It's not that I'm sure the flip-flops are lovely, but I don't really care about that. I care about them getting into Nordstrom. So whoever you're pitching to, you've got to be able to tell them a story and offer them a solution that they can offer to their audience. Otherwise, they're not going to be interested.
And Cindy, also, you're on the other side of things, actually helping the people craft the message
Yes.
and go out there and pitch.
Yes.
How different is it now pitching versus, let's say, 5 or even 10 years ago? I mean, it seems like reporters are always complaining even more lately about, oh, you get too many pitches, and there's fewer of them,
Right.
and fewer mainstream publications.
Well, I think the whole effort of pitching to the press has changed quite a bit. I'm working with about 5 startups now that are in various stages, and we're in the midst of actually going out with a press release and getting all of the stories together on the verticals to pitch to the press. And it's a lot of work, and I think that's one of the things that I would say. If you don't have a PR company that's working with you, and most of you guys probably don't. I've been a co-founder. I never had a PR company. I had to figure out how to do it myself. Just make sure you do your research. Spend the time understanding who you need to target in the press and research those people. Make sure, again, you've got your story put together. So a lot of times what I see with startups is that they talk about what the product or the service is, but they don't really talk about the solution that it's solving. So if you go back to, sort of the basic startup mode of, what's your problem and how are you solving it, that's a great thing to build from. So if you can start from there and build your story around that, and if you've got a new partner that's coming in, maybe using your product, if there's somebody using it in a really clever way, those are the things I think that, that journalists are looking for now. The other thing I would say is that it's not just the press that you have to go after. So there's the whole blogging space, and there are so many, you guys probably know, there's so many influencers in the blogging space, and going after them can be even more tricky because that whole business has changed too. Some of them have gotten very, very popular, and it's hard to get noticed by them, but you can do it. And do your research. Find the bloggers that you think are best aligned with your market and what you're doing, and see if you can create a relationship with them. And then there's social media, right? So all of this sort of works together. The press, getting content marketing, which you're going to talk about a bit, but also making sure that your social media is in alignment with everything that you're trying to push out. It should all work together, and it should all tell the same story in different ways. And yeah, so.
And having the executive available, there's nothing worse than actually a company pitches you, you love the idea.
Right.
They go, sorry, the top person isn't available.
Right.
You get 3 levels down, it's like, oh,
Right.
it takes an edge off it a bit.
Right, exactly, right.
Okay, interesting. Questions? Moving in, okay.
Okay, since Cindy mentioned, I'll just talk a little bit about the idea of content marketing. And so a lot of businesses have cottoned on to the idea of reaching out to their potential customer base directly and connecting with them by, with a blog, telling their own story, telling the stories about what they do. That's sort of become known as content marketing. It's really just the same kind of editorial, but it's a company doing it for itself. And the keys are the same. The keys are you have to tell a story, you have to say something interesting, and you have to think about what you want to have happen. So If you take a look at Yahoo, for example, significant percentage of our content is not original. Significant percentage is, but a significant percentage is not original. It's syndicated from other publications. And if you then take a step down and look at that chain of publications, some of them are telling stories that they first found from the blogs of startups and businesses that have found something interesting to talk about. And that's what you're wanting to do. You're wanting to come up with a blog post that is of interest to everybody. And that usually means, let's say your startup is doing medical wearable device technologies. It's pretty cutting edge field. You probably, unless you're, doing something remarkable, it's probably not a product that is really likely to affect an end user or be purchasable by an end user, or in fact be ready yet. That doesn't mean you can't talk about the areas of medical issues that you're trying to solve, talk about the statistics about them. People love, statistics, how the spread of XYZ disease has changed, maps to do with that. All those kinds of things are the kinds of stories that people will eat up and incidentally then say, this story came from your company. And that builds in everybody else's mind the sense that you guys are experts, which is really what you're going for.
But do you guys ever find like a lot of founder myopia, where the fact that the person describing it, they're convinced this is the most interesting part of it, say, no, actually, no one really cares about that. I know you dedicate your whole life to it, but actually, it's how the people are using it, or the history of how it came together.
Absolutely.
And then how do you get to that point where you actually can get them to the more interesting point? Is it an antagonistic process where you interview them until they finally crystallize their story, or do you have a third party come in and say,
why don't you answer that first, Cindy, because I have a viewpoint, but I'll do it after yours.
It happens a lot, and it's one thing that we try to do, which is help the founders or the technical founders sort of move from, this is my vision and this is what I need to bring to the world, to what is it that the world really wants. So it could be the same, it could be the same product, but at the same time, it could be positioned differently. There could be a different use for it. They may not have looked at the competitive market. So there's, all the issues of how do we competitively position it in a way that's going to get attention from the media. And it's hard. I mean, it's part of what we do. We have to sort of guide them and change the way they think in a way.
So way back in 2002, I worked at Sun Microsystems. I was in charge of sun.com, the main website. And I had an ongoing fight with the 2 or 3 CMOs that we had during that time about how Sun itself should talk about our new products and technologies. I was essentially told and made to use the official marketing message in every single article we wrote about our own products. And I would say again and again, your audience doesn't know what you're talking about. Marketing message doesn't speak to them. It speaks to employees of Sun Microsystems. You're using acronyms they've never heard of. You're using terminology that marketing people and technologists understand, but not your customers. That speaks to this idea of sort of founder myopia. People have to let go of the way you've decided you must tell the story. Because that's not, if you're sticking to one way the story must be told, you'll never ever get more than one story told. You have to allow somebody else to tell the story. And frankly, the best way to do that is, if you want to tell it yourself, find somebody who's a good storyteller and get them to tell it for you. Give them some free rein to come in and interview the CEO and the founder. Interview the people creating... Lost that. There we go. Interviewing the people creating the technology, and let them tell the story. They'll come up with angles you haven't thought of, and they'll also come up with ways to reach that audience. If you think of it from an editor's or somebody in the press's perspective, my job as an editor is to inform and educate and delight and interest my audience. It's not to tell your story.
Because my motto is inform and entertain. It's almost like a takeoff of the LAPD motto of, protect and serve. I'm wondering, too, on press releases, this is a kind of a difference of opinion people have. Long or short, and why?
For me, I'm fine with long. If I'm even going to look at the press release, I'm usually doing it as the essentially considering it the sort of background reference document for my story. So more you've got in there, the better, because I'm looking for information about the product or service. I'm looking for details about the names of the people, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I can call and get all that, but it's easier if I don't, my number of questions I'm going to make are restricted. So I prefer long. Having said that, I also don't look at press releases. I only look at a press release once I've decided I'm going to do the story. Pitching with a press release is a guaranteed fail.
Cindy, do you read?
Well, actually, I was thinking about how all of this effort, it's a tremendous amount of effort, but what does this lead to for a startup? And generally, you either have goals of awareness, but you probably are in that mode of needing to gain traction with your audience, getting your numbers up. If you're going out for money, you're probably, at that point of, oh my God, I don't have 1 million users or, 1 million installs for my app. And everything that Owen has been talking about in terms of approaching the press, but also I think the content marketing side is really important, because content can bring in and attract users in a way that I've never seen before. So being able to tell your story, tell it in the right place, but continue to do that, whether it's through social media, your blog, anyone who will listen to you. It's really important, I think, to look at various ways of being able to get your company to that next step. And I don't know if you guys are like me, but I had like 0 marketing budget, so I had to get very, very creative with the tools that are out there, and there are many, and there are many sources out there that you can use before you even go to the press.
So, I'm glad you said long, though. Here's why. I do fight with some of my clients quite a bit on this. They prefer the shorter, and I was like, this is not like a haiku contest, right? This is not, and they go, oh, but it takes too long to read. And I go, nobody's going to read this. The only people who are going to read this are in this room right now. A reporter is going to glance at it to certify a certain fact and things like that. And I found the shorter a press release, the greater the increase of mistakes that occur because of latent ambiguities. People assume they know something, it's not really stated, they write around it, and a mistake occurs. So actually, longer often is better, it costs more. It's no fun to read, length, but nobody's really going to read that. The ultimate thing you want to do is get a good story out of it. So,
We usually write short ones.
yeah, okay. You're the one, teach his own. And were you raising your hand for a... People, you're killing me, man. Any questions?
Questions, yeah.
Yes.
So, I get about the story, but my question is, what are exact steps? What are the recommendations to reach out to press? There are low-key journalists, and there are some journalists working for national or even other social media. So, how to reach out?
So if it was me, I would... repeat the question. So it's specifically how to reach out to journalists, local journalists, national journalists, wide reach, small reach, who to do it to and how. So number one, all of them. I know that's a glib answer, but it's the reality. Number two, I would not actually shy away from the bigger ones. Just because you think, and in your heart it's true, know that it's a small product, a small company, a small story. That doesn't mean that the story itself, if it's not a powerful one, won't resonate well. So don't be afraid to go to the larger audiences, but do your homework. You can't just cold reach out to anybody. If I was going to let's say I'm starting a business to do some kind of Android apps. And let's say it's around the medical stuff again. So who do I want to reach out to? I want to reach out to Android app publications, medical publications. So I go do a lot of research, find out which ones there are. And I specifically then start to find out who works there, whose names are written on articles that are like the ones I would like to see, get those names, look for those email addresses, look for those contacts, and reach out to them directly. Don't, I actually wouldn't, I'm not a big fan of the sort of send a press release to 2,000 names you got from a press mailing list. Those are the emails that don't get opened. Instead, reach out with an offer of some kind. I would love to be interviewed about this area of medical technology, or I would love to be interviewed about how we go about developing Android apps. slightly alternative takes on things so that you're presenting yourself as a resource to the journalist. Because there's two reasons for that. One, they might just like it and do the story. Number two, they'll file you away if they genuinely believe you for the future. And then they'll call you up and say, hey, I was going to do a story about malaria, and I know you have a sort of malaria-related app. Can I talk to you about the issue? Now, you're not getting your app and your product out there, but you're getting your name associated with the right area, number one. Number two, now you've made a connection with that journalist. You're going to be much more successful reaching out to them when you really want something covered. So do a lot of research. Cindy said that earlier, and it's absolutely true. You want to find the right people. You don't want to find 2,000 people. You want to find the people that are writing about the kinds of things you want covered.
I would add to that too, yeah, know their beats, but also, if you can, know their personalities. You'll have people at actually very large publications who are the nicest people in the universe. Then you have people at small, mid-tier publications who are like absolute prima donnas, right? So it's just, you never know. If they want data, get it for them, but never, never, never send them saying, by the way, this story did interest you because somebody at the New York Times wrote that. Sending a journalist someone else's story is just telling them, you're not as good as they are. So that's actually one way just to alienate them, make them snide, and things like that.
What not to do.
And the final thing is, there's no such thing as like, the more information you disclose, the better you are. By being reserved, the worse story you're going to get.
Hi, Cindy. My name is Greg, and I had a question. You said you work for Firestart Partners, first off, and I wanted to know a little bit more about them, as well as you said there were more resources that you had available in terms of public relations and other ideas of that nature for entrepreneurs to use in terms of helping them with their public relations or reaching out to the press. Could you mention what some of those would be?
We do actually all of that. So everything, if you look at it from the startup standpoint, usually where we start with a startup is after they've launched, the ideas, it's in development, it may be very close to launching, but the actual team is having trouble getting from the product to creating the story that goes out the door. And that's such a critical time, and it's so important to make sure that you've got your story right. It has to be written the right way. It has to resonate the right way. There's probably 2 or 3 different versions of that story that you need to write. One goes to the investors, one goes to the consumer, one goes to the press. There's all of that. And depending on what your goals are, we always, we're results-based, so we align with the goals of the company. And if you need a roadmap, we do that. If you need us to write for you, we do that, blogs, whatever. We do a lot of positioning and research on the market, so we can help you understand this is the best way to position your product or your service given the competitive landscape. You'd be surprised how many founders don't do that. And it's a really important step.
Yes, the last question. You in front.
We've got one.
Hi,
We've got one over there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you. Excuse me.
I have a question.
You can get me after.
From pre-launch to maybe like 2 years out, what are some of the big events that would make sense to do a press release? And then the second part is, how do you cultivate and build the relationship with the key journalists?
So how do you cultivate a relationship, and what are, between 0 to 2 years, what are some of the milestones where you should announce?
In terms of milestones, I think it's obviously product launches. You see a lot of companies do things like releases and announcements around like executive changes. Unless it's Guy Kawasaki coming on to head up your business, I wouldn't bother. I mean, if it isn't a name that everyone will have heard of, don't bother. No one's going to be interested. But the other thing that you want to do is key relationships with big partners. If your startup, I wouldn't say is acquired by Google, but maybe Google becomes a customer, yeah, that's probably worthy of some attention. But mostly it's still around those stories. If you don't think there's a story there, it's going to be very hard to get any attention. In terms of cultivating relationships, it's thinking about what the other person wants as well. So editors and journalists are always wanting sources. I actually would love to have more people I can turn to ask questions about certain pain points in the startup process.
There are a lot of them.
Yeah. And there are a lot of pain points, but some of the one, people don't like talking about funding, for example. There's not a lot of good stories out there about what it was like going into up Sand Hill Road and pitching. How did that feel? You hear, the people who talk about that are VCs themselves, and occasionally on some startups blogs. But there's a lot of unknowns there, and it'd be great to have resources to talk to about that. So that's the kind of thing that yeah, that's not anything to do with your business. But once you've made that relationship, then it's a lot easier for me to listen to you about your business. Even if I'm not going to write about it, maybe I know someone else who will. And again, if I turn to one of the Yahoo Tech journalists and say, hey, this company looks interesting, it doesn't guarantee they'll do something with it, but it's a lot better than if it comes from you. So there's those kinds of relationships are important.
Your birth notice, your obituary, major product releases, those could get covered. And really, to be honest, to actually get that relationship, be honest. Bill Watkins, former CEO of Seagate, is still one of the most popular executives for journalists, because that guy, you can ask him anything and he will respond. Same thing with Elon Musk. There's none of that murky, vague comments. I mean, you will get these very direct statements and people go, my God, my job is done. All I have to do is wrap some paragraphs around this and people are gonna love this story. But we're out of time, sadly enough, so I wonder if you give our speakers a great big hand. Do we have some Q&A coming on? Thank you very much. Great.
Thank you.